My name is Michael Jensen. I'm 42 years old and have dedicated the past 15 years of my life to building what has become one of the most respected software security companies in Austin, Texas. We specialize in protecting corporate infrastructures from increasingly sophisticated cyber threats. I started with just 3 employees in a cramped office space. Now we employ over 70 specialists across 3 states. The road hasn't always been easy, but I've taken pride in building something meaningful, creating jobs, and protecting our clients' digital assets. That I met Sarah Whitman during a cybersecurity conference in Chicago when we were both 27. I was presenting a panel on emerging network vulnerabilities, and she was representing her marketing firm that specialized in tech industry clients. She asked the most insightful questions during the Q&A session, challenging my assumptions about user interface design and security systems. Her intelligence was immediately evident, but it was her confidence that truly captivated me. While everyone else in the room seemed intimidated by the technical jargon, Sarah cut through it all with precision and clarity, and we ended up talking until the venue staff needed to close the conference hall, then continued our conversation at a nearby cafe until well past midnight. Sarah had this magnetic energy about her, ambitious yet approachable, with a quick wit that kept me on my toes. She had graduated top of her class from Northwestern, worked her way up rapidly in the competitive Chicago tech marketing scene, and spoke passionately about revolutionizing how security companies communicated with everyday users. Within 6 months, we were video calling daily. I'd fly to Chicago one weekend. She'd come to Austin the next. Our connection felt effortless, as though we'd known each other for years rather than months. By our 1-year anniversary of meeting, I proposed during a weekend trip to the Texas Hill Country. The setting sun painted the landscape in rich oranges and purples as she said yes. Both of us believing we'd found our perfect match, that we decided to settle in Austin, where my fledgling company was showing promising growth. Sarah transferred to her firm's Texas office, eventually becoming their director of tech sector marketing within 2 years. We purchased our dream home in the hills overlooking the city, a modernist design with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the downtown skyline like a living painting. During sunset, the entire house would glow with golden light that made Sarah's auburn hair shine like fire. Those moments, watching her silhouetted against the Austin skyline, filled me with a contentment I never knew was possible. For 12 years, I genuinely believed we had the perfect marriage. We traveled extensively, hiking the Inca Trail, exploring Tokyo's hidden restaurants, sailing along Croatia's coastline. We built our careers in parallel, supporting each other through stressful product launches and difficult client acquisitions. During quarterly strategy retreats, Sarah would help refine my company's messaging while I'd offer insights on her marketing campaigns. We entertained often, hosting dinner parties that brought together Austin's tech community, creating valuable connections for both our careers. That we had decided against having children early in our marriage. It was a mutual decision. We were both deeply invested in our professional trajectories and enjoyed the freedom to travel spontaneously or work late when necessary. Instead, we doted on our nieces and nephews, becoming the cool aunt and uncle who always brought back exotic souvenirs from our travels. Our home became our sanctuary, filled with art collected from our journeys and memories we built together. For over a decade, I believed we shared a deep, trusting relationship rooted in mutual respect and shared ambitions. Our friends often commented on how in sync we seemed, finishing each other's thoughts during conversations or instinctively knowing when the other needed support during stressful periods. Relationship goals, they'd say, sometimes with a hint of envy. Little did I know that behind this carefully constructed facade, the foundation of our marriage was slowly being eroded by deception and betrayal. The first signs that something was amiss began to appear about 18 months ago. Looking back, I can identify the exact moment when the subtle shift began. We were having breakfast on our terrace on a Sunday morning, a ritual we'd maintained throughout our marriage, when Sarah's phone chimed with a message. She grabbed it with unusual swiftness, glanced at the screen, and immediately turned it face down. When I asked casually who it was, she muttered something about work emergencies and quickly changed the subject to our upcoming anniversary plans. That moment alone wouldn't have raised alarms, but it was followed by a gradual, but unmistakable pattern of behavior changes. Sarah became increasingly protective of her phone, always keeping it face down when around me, taking it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom, and setting up new security features I hadn't seen her use before. Several times, I noticed her stepping onto the patio or into another room to take calls, her voice dropping to a whisper whenever I walked nearby. Her work hours, once predictable and transparent, became erratic and vaguely defined. Suddenly, there were late meetings that just came up, weekend team building events I wasn't invited to join, and sudden business trips announced with minimal notice. Previously, Sarah had always shared her calendar with me, not out of obligation, but because we genuinely enjoyed coordinating our schedules to maximize our time together. That transparency gradually disappeared, replaced with vague time frames and imprecise explanations. When I'd called during these mysterious work commitments, she would often not answer. My text would show as read but receive responses hours later, with explanations that never quite added up. The meeting ran long and my phone died, or we were in a signal dead zone during the team retreat. Each excuse seemed plausible in isolation but formed a troubling pattern when viewed collectively. Our home, once filled with conversation and laughter, grew increasingly silent. Sarah began arriving home later, often with the distinct smell of wine on her breath, explaining it away as client dinners or team celebrations. On several occasions, I noticed unfamiliar fragrances lingering on her clothes, subtle, but definitely not her usual perfume. Most concerning was the change in our physical relationship. Our once vibrant intimacy dwindled to occasional, perfunctory encounters that left me feeling more disconnected than before. Sarah would flinch slightly when I touched her unexpectedly, or find reasons to go to bed long after I had retired for the night. When I tried to discuss these changes, her responses grew defensive and accusatory. "You're being paranoid," she'd say, or "Not everything is about you, Michael. My career is demanding right now." Any attempt to address the growing distance between us was reframed as me being controlling or insecure. She'd remind me of my own busy schedule, suggesting I was being hypocritical for questioning hers. We'd gone from being best friends who couldn't wait to share our daily experiences to strangers who merely shared a living space. The woman who once laughed easily at my jokes now offered only polite smiles. Our deep conversations about everything from business ethics to philosophy had devolved into superficial exchanges about household logistics and scheduling that I tried everything I could think of to bridge the growing chasm between us. I suggested couples counseling, which Sarah immediately rejected as unnecessary and potentially damaging to our professional reputations if anyone found out. I planned a surprise weekend getaway to Sonoma, where we'd first discovered our shared love of wine, but she canceled last minute due to an unavoidable client crisis. I even directly asked if she was depressed or unhappy with our marriage, only to be told I was creating problems where none existed. One evening, after yet another canceled dinner plan, I found myself alone at the dining table I had carefully set with her favorite flowers and wine. As I sat there surrounded by cooling food and flickering candles, I realized I was grieving for a relationship that still technically existed. The emotional intimacy that had defined our connection for over a decade had disappeared, leaving behind only the hollow shell of our former life together. Still, I wasn't ready to believe the worst. I told myself that all marriages go through difficult phases, that the pressure of our careers was temporarily straining our connection. I convinced myself that patience and understanding would eventually restore what we had lost. In retrospect, I was clinging to the image of our marriage, rather than confronting its deteriorating reality. The confirmation of my worst fears came on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday evening. Sarah had rushed out of the house after receiving a text, claiming there was an emergency client meeting regarding a product launch scheduled for the following week. The urgency seemed plausible. I'd certainly had my share of last-minute crises with important clients, but something about her flustered manner raised my suspicions. In her haste to leave, Sarah had done something unprecedented. She'd left her laptop unlocked on our kitchen counter. Throughout our marriage, we'd respected each other's privacy while maintaining an open-door policy about our devices. Neither of us had anything to hide, but we also didn't routinely go through each other's communications out of basic respect that I Initially walked past the laptop, pouring myself a glass of whiskey and trying to focus on a documentary I'd been wanting to watch. But then a notification sound chimed from the computer, and almost involuntarily, my eyes flicked to the screen. A message preview appeared in the corner. Can't wait to see you tonight. Room 302 as usual. Brought that wine you loved last time. Mark. Something broke inside me at that moment. A cold sensation spread through my chest as 12 years of trust suddenly collapsed under the weight of those few casual words. Room 302 as usual. The implication of routine, of established patterns in their deception, hit me like a physical blow that I've always considered myself an ethical person who values privacy and trust. Under normal circumstances, I would never breach someone's personal communications. But these were not normal circumstances, and some primal instinct for self-preservation overrode my usual principles. I sat down at the laptop, my hands trembling slightly as I opened her messaging app. What I found was devastating in its comprehensiveness. There were hundreds of messages between Sarah and this man named Mark dating back almost a year. From their exchanges, I learned that Mark Donovan was her colleague, a recently promoted marketing director who had transferred from their Chicago office approximately 14 months ago. He was married with 3 children, the youngest just starting kindergarten according to the family photos they'd mockingly discussed. Their messages detailed their affair with a casualness that suggested complete comfort in their betrayal. They coordinated alibis with practiced ease, planned weekend trips disguised as work commitments, and even exchanged inside jokes about me being oblivious to their relationship. He actually helped me pack for the conference this weekend, Sarah had written, followed by laughing emojis. If only he knew you'd be unpacking everything within minutes of arrival. The messages revealed their designated meeting spots: a hotel downtown for weeknight encounters, a cabin in the hill country for weekend getaways, even occasional rendezvous in our own home when I was traveling for business. They discussed intimate details of their relationship alongside tactical planning for maintaining their deception. They had created a shared digital calendar with coded entries to coordinate their meetings around their spouses' schedules. But what truly devastated me was discovering a separate email account Sarah had created specifically for communication with Mark about what they callously termed the endgame. I found dozens of exchanges discussing their strategy for her eventual divorce from me, including guidance from Mark on how to build a case that would maximize her financial settlement. Remember to document any time he raises his voice, Mark had written. Even better if you can record it. Texas courts take emotional abuse seriously, and it could help secure a better settlement. Another message advised: start keeping a journal of controlling behavior. Anything can be spun the right way. If he questions your late nights, that's monitoring and controlling your movements. If he asks about finances, he's financially controlling. It's all in how you frame it. Sarah had been methodically creating a fictional narrative of our marriage, documenting fabricated instances of emotional abuse, control, and manipulation. She'd been forwarding work emails to this secret account whenever I expressed normal concerns about her late nights or unexplained absences, recasting my confusion and hurt as evidence of controlling behavior. The financial aspects of their planning were equally calculated. Mark, who had a brother-in-law in financial services, had been advising Sarah on how to gradually transfer funds from our joint accounts to private accounts I couldn't access. They discussed strategies for undervaluing my company during divorce proceedings and identified which assets she should fight hardest to claim. Remember, the judge only sees what's presented in court, Mark had written. With the right documentation and testimony, you can shape the narrative however we need. I've seen my sister do it with my brother-in-law, and she walked away with everything plus alimony. What hit me hardest was the absolute absence of remorse in their communications. There was no evidence of guilt or conflict about destroying 2 marriages and potentially causing lasting harm to Mark's children. Instead, there was an almost gleeful quality to their planning, as though the deception itself added excitement to their relationship that I read until I couldn't bear anymore, then methodically began creating records of everything I'd found. I took screenshots, forwarded key emails to my private account, and documented the timeline of their affair and conspiracy. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking over Austin, casting long shadows across our living room, a living room where Sarah and I had once built dreams together. Now the sight of their ultimate destruction. When Sarah returned home around 7 a.m., I had composed myself enough to pretend nothing had changed. I greeted her with a tired smile, mentioning that I'd fallen asleep on the couch watching documentaries. She seemed relieved at my explanation, completely unaware that in the span of one night, our marriage had been irreversibly altered in my eyes. She kissed my cheek absently, the scent of unfamiliar cologne barely masked by the coffee she'd picked up on her way home. Another small deception in a mounting collection of lies. Crazy client emergency, she explained vaguely. Had to pull an all-nighter to fix their campaign strategy. I'm going to shower and crash for a few hours before heading back to the office. I nodded understandingly, my newfound knowledge sitting like a stone in my stomach. As she headed upstairs, I realized I was now the one living a double life, outwardly. The same trusting husband I'd always been, inwardly beginning to calculate my response to this life-altering betrayal. I didn't confront Sarah immediately after discovering her betrayal. The businessman in me recognized that emotional reactions, however justified, rarely yield optimal outcomes. Instead, I channeled my pain into methodical planning. The day after my discovery, I called in sick to work for the first time in years and began researching divorce attorneys while Sarah was at her office, or wherever she actually spent her days. After careful consideration, I scheduled a consultation with Catherine Mendez, a divorce attorney known for her strategic approach and discretion. Her office, located in a converted Victorian house far from the downtown legal district where Sarah's professional network was concentrated, offered the privacy I needed for this initial conversation. Catherine listened intently as I outlined what I discovered, occasionally taking notes, but mostly absorbing the details with the practiced neutrality of someone who'd heard countless similar stories. When I finished, she didn't offer immediate sympathy or outrage, which confirmed I'd chosen the right attorney. Instead, she outlined a methodical approach. Texas is a no-fault divorce state, but evidence of adultery and financial misconduct can significantly impact property division, she explained. What you found is compelling, but we need more systematic documentation. For the next few months, you need to become the world's most detail-oriented detective while appearing to be the same trusting husband you've always been. Catherine advised me to gather evidence systematically, financial records, communication records, and documentation of Sarah and Mark's movements. She recommended hiring a private investigator to document their meetings and photograph them entering and leaving hotels or other meeting locations. She also suggested working with a forensic accountant to track every suspicious transaction Sarah had made over the past year. Don't confront her, Catherine emphasized. The moment you show your hand, evidence will start disappearing and stories will change. We need to build our case first, then act from a position of strength. For the next 3 months, I lived a surreal double life. On the surface, I maintained our normal routines, attending industry events together, hosting dinner parties for colleagues, even planning a summer vacation we would never take. I feigned ignorance about her late meetings and weekend conferences, sometimes even offering to pack her bag or drop her at the airport for trips I now knew were rendezvous with Mark. Meanwhile, I executed Catherine's strategy with meticulous attention to detail. I secured copies of all our financial records going back 5 years. I documented every unexplained absence with dates, times, and her stated reasons. I backed up the digital evidence of their affair and conspiracy from that first night of discovery, storing multiple copies in secure locations. The private investigator Catherine recommended, a former law enforcement officer named David, provided weekly reports with time-stamped photographs and detailed accounts of Sarah and Mark's movements. He documented them checking into hotels, dining intimately in restaurants far from their usual professional circles, and meeting in a rented apartment Mark had secured under a business name associated with his brother-in-law. David also managed to photograph documents Sarah had removed from our home safe, copies of investment statements, property deeds, and incorporation documents for my company. This confirmed she was actively gathering information to use against me in anticipated divorce proceedings. The forensic accountant tracked a pattern of escalating financial deception. It began with small transfers from our joint savings to an account in Sarah's name alone. then progressed to more significant movements of funds hidden within legitimate-seeming transactions. Most concerning was evidence that Sarah had been systematically gathering information about my company's valuation and client contracts, presumably to challenge my claims about the business's worth during divorce proceedings. Throughout this period, I maintained a careful facade of normalcy at home. I occasionally mentioned how much I appreciated Sarah and our life together, fishing for responses that now rang hollow knowing their true context. I suggested we update our wills and review our retirement plans, steps that seemed like natural financial planning but allowed me to document our current asset positions officially. Most disturbingly, I had to watch Sarah craft a narrative about our marriage that bore no resemblance to reality. She began leaving oblique evidence of problems in our relationship. A self-help book about emotional abuse left conspicuously on her nightstand, notes about therapist recommendations visible in her planner, tearful phone calls to friends that conveniently occurred when I was within earshot. That I maintained my composure through these performances, reminding myself that each deception strengthened my eventual position. But the emotional toll was immense. Each night, I lay beside a stranger wearing my wife's face, someone actively plotting my financial and emotional destruction while smiling over morning coffee. I lost 20 pounds during those months, developed insomnia that left dark circles under my eyes, and found myself struggling to focus during business meetings. To manage the psychological strain, I began seeing a therapist under strict confidentiality, scheduling appointments during lunch hours, and paying privately to ensure no record appeared in our insurance claims. Dr. Martinez helped me process my grief and anger in those sessions, providing a crucial outlet that allowed me to maintain my facade at home. One evening, about 2 months into this charade, Sarah asked if I was feeling well, noting my weight loss and apparent fatigue. For a moment, I glimpsed what appeared to be genuine concern in her eyes, and I nearly broke down and confronted her. Instead, I attributed my condition to stress over a major new client contract, an explanation she readily accepted before returning to her phone, undoubtedly messaging Mark about their next rendezvous. That night, reviewing the latest batch of investigator photos showing Sarah and Mark laughing intimately at a restaurant while I'd been home preparing a dinner she'd never arrived for, I realized something important. The woman I had loved no longer existed, if she ever had. The person sharing my home was someone capable of extraordinary deception and callousness. This realization, painful as it was, strengthened my resolve to protect myself and everything I'd worked to build. As my evidence dossier grew, Catherine advised adding one more element to my preparation, creating a record of being a supportive, loving husband. I began sending Sarah thoughtful text messages during the day, ordered flowers for no special reason, and suggested weekend activities I knew she would decline, but that would establish my continued investment in our marriage. These gestures, documented and time-stamped, would later contrast sharply with the narrative she was attempting to create. By the end of 3 months, I had compiled an exhaustive record of Sarah and Mark's affair, their conspiracy to manipulate divorce proceedings, and their attempts to hide assets and fabricate abuse claims. I had secured my company's digital assets, changed critical passwords, and quietly updated key contracts to protect them from potential claims. I had established separate banking arrangements for my personal funds going forward and consulted with financial advisors about protecting my assets. In short, I had done everything possible to prepare for the storm I was about to unleash. What Sarah didn't realize was that while she thought she was carefully laying a trap for me, she had actually been building her own cage, piece by methodical piece. With my legal preparation solidly in place, I moved to the next phase of my response. I didn't want just a legal victory. I wanted Sarah and Mark to experience a fraction of the betrayal and public humiliation they had planned for me. My approach to this social reckoning was as methodical as my legal preparation had been, strategic, patient, and designed to unfold with perfect timing. I began with subtle social moves designed to isolate them while maintaining plausible deniability about my involvement. My first step targeted Mark's home situation. Using an anonymous email account created through multiple privacy layers, I contacted Mark's wife, Jennifer. I crafted a message that provided just enough verifiable information about Mark's movements and suspicious behaviors to awaken her curiosity without revealing my identity or the full extent of my knowledge. I believe your husband is not being truthful about his relationship with a colleague. The message read, including specific dates and locations that Jennifer could potentially verify through credit card statements or other records. I deliberately avoided mentioning Sarah's name or providing conclusive evidence, understanding that Jennifer would likely conduct her own investigation if her suspicions were aroused. Within days, David reported increased tension between Mark and Jennifer. He was staying later at the office, and she had begun calling him repeatedly throughout the day, sometimes resulting in heated conversations conducted in hushed tones in stairwells or parking garages. The first hairline fracture had appeared. In their deception.my next move focused on their professional standing. Both Sarah and Mark worked for Axiom Marketing, a firm with a public reputation for professional integrity and a company handbook that explicitly prohibited relationships between managers and direct reports, a policy violation since Mark had become Sarah's supervisor during a recent reorganization. I created a detailed dossier documenting their misuse of company resources, expense reports showing meals and hotel stays billed to client accounts when they were actually conducting their affair, emails sent on company time coordinating their relationship, and calendar manipulations that showed them falsifying business meetings to create opportunities to meet. I anonymously submitted this information to Axiom's Ethics Committee and Human Resources Department, presenting it as coming from a concerned colleague who had accidentally discovered the impropriety. Within 2 weeks, both Sarah and Mark began showing signs of professional strain. Sarah came home visibly tense several evenings, mentioning vaguely that there was some internal politics affecting her department. Mark, according to my investigator, had been called into multiple closed-door meetings with HR and senior management. The second crack in their foundation had formed. The third element of my social strategy was the most subtle but potentially most damaging in their professional community. Austin's technology sector, despite its size, functions like a small town. When it comes to reputation and relationships, information travels quickly through informal networks, and professional standing depends heavily on perceived reliability and ethical conduct. I carefully selected my moment, the annual Tech Forward charity gala, which brought together executives, investors, and thought leaders from across the industry. Sarah and I had attended this event together for years, and this year would be no different on the surface. I dressed in my best suit, complimented Sarah sincerely on her appearance, and played the role of devoted husband throughout the evening. During the event, I circulated independently, engaging in conversations with key industry contacts who had relationships with both Sarah's firm and my company. In these discussions, I carefully planted seeds of doubt about recent business decisions at Axiom Marketing, expressing concern about ethical lapses in leadership that had me reconsidering our working relationship with them. When asked for specifics, I would appear uncomfortable and change the subject, leaving the impression that I knew something serious but was too professional to openly discuss several influential venture capitalists who had invested in companies using Axiom services. I mentioned hearing rumors about significant personnel issues that might affect client relationships. With others, I expressed concern about potential conflicts of interest in Axiom's management team that troubled me professionally. Each comment was calibrated to raise questions without making specific accusations, allowing rumors to develop organically. By the end of the evening, I noticed several people looking speculatively at Sarah and Mark, who was attending with his increasingly suspicious wife, as they conversed briefly near the bar. The whispers had begun, and in Austin's close-knit professional community, whispers could quickly become roars. Within weeks, the dominoes I had carefully aligned began falling in sequence. Mark's wife initiated separation proceedings after apparently confirming her suspicions. According to my investigator, she had moved out of their family home with their children and was staying with her parents in Houston. Mark had been spotted sleeping in his office on 2 occasions. Simultaneously, Axiom Marketing launched a formal investigation into the ethical complaints, temporarily reassigning both Sarah and Mark away from client-facing roles while the review proceeded. Sarah tried to conceal this development from me, claiming she was focusing on internal projects. When I inquired about her unusual work-from-home schedule, the professional community began treating them both with subtle caution. Invitations to industry events became less frequent, and conversations at those they did attend often ended awkwardly when certain topics arose. Neither could identify the source of the changed attitudes, which added to their growing paranoia. Most satisfyingly, their united front began showing signs of stress. My investigator reported increasingly tense meetings between them, sometimes ending with visible arguments. They couldn't determine how their carefully guarded secret had begun leaking from multiple directions simultaneously, which made them suspicious of each other. Mark was seen accusing Sarah of talking too much during one heated exchange outside their usual hotel, while Sarah was overheard questioning whether Mark's wife had hired someone to follow them. The pressure was causing exactly the fractures I had anticipated. Their relationship, built on mutual deception and the thrill of secret betrayal, proved poorly equipped to handle real adversity. As external pressure mounted from their spouses, employers, and professional community, they began turning on each other rather than supporting one another. I watched this social unraveling with detached satisfaction, maintaining my appearance of blissful ignorance at home, while Sarah grew increasingly agitated and withdrawn. On several occasions, she received phone calls that sent her hurrying to another room, returning with reddened eyes and a trembling voice claiming it was just work stress. The culmination of this phase came when Mark's wife apparently discovered conclusive evidence of the affair. According to neighborhood gossip later relayed by a mutual friend, Jennifer had arrived at their home unexpectedly during what Mark had claimed was a business trip, only to find him there with another woman, who fled through the back door. Though Sarah's name wasn't mentioned in this account, her sudden food poisoning that same evening told me everything I needed to know. This incident accelerated their professional investigation as well, as Jennifer reportedly contacted Axiom CEO directly with her discoveries. Within days, both Sarah and Mark were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the ethics investigation, effectively isolating them from their professional network and support system. Throughout this process, I maintained my role as the concerned but oblivious husband, offering support for Sarah's work difficulties and suggesting she take time to focus on self-care during this stressful period. Each gesture of support was carefully documented for later use, building a record that would directly contradict the narrative of abuse she had been constructing by the time their social and professional lives had begun truly unraveling. They still had no idea that their greatest challenge, the legal reckoning, was yet to come. They remained unaware that every desperate attempt to salvage their reputations was being monitored, documented, and added to the case building against them. The stage was now perfectly set for the final act of my response. Only after Sarah and Mark's professional and social lives began disintegrating did I finally advance to the legal phase of my plan. Following Catherine's advice, I waited until the optimal moment, when they were already destabilized but still unaware of my knowledge. The timing was calculated to maximize the psychological impact and minimize their ability to mount an effective response on a Wednesday morning, after Sarah had left for another strategy meeting to address her professional crisis. My attorney filed divorce papers with the Travis County Courthouse. The petition cited irreconcilable differences and adultery, included a preliminary outline of Sarah's financial misconduct, and requested temporary orders freezing certain assets pending further proceedings. Catherine had advised against including the full documentation of Sarah's affair and conspiracy in the initial filing. The initial petition is public record, she explained. We'll provide the detailed evidence to the court and opposing counsel through proper channels, but there's no need to make every sordid detail public immediately. The threat of exposure is sometimes more powerful than the exposure itself. That evening, when Sarah returned home, looking exhausted and distracted as had become her new normal, she was greeted by a process server waiting in our driveway. I watched from the kitchen window as she was handed the divorce papers, her expression changing from confusion to shock as she scanned the first page. She stood motionless in the driveway for nearly 5 minutes before slowly walking toward the house, her face drained of color. When she entered, I was calmly preparing dinner as though it were any ordinary evening. She stood in the kitchen doorway clutching the papers, seemingly unable to find words. "How long have you known?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Long enough," I replied evenly, continuing to chop vegetables without looking up. I suggest you find somewhere else to stay tonight. Your things will be packed and ready for you to collect tomorrow. My attorney will coordinate with whoever you retain. She attempted several approaches in rapid succession. First denial, then tearful apologies, followed by angry accusations that I had driven her to the affair through emotional neglect. When none of these produced a reaction, she finally resorted to threats. "You have no idea what I have on you," she hissed. "No judge will side with you when they hear how controlling you've been. Mark and I have documentation going back months." At this, I finally looked up and met her gaze directly. "I'm aware of your documentation, Sarah. Just as I'm aware of your conversations with Mark about fabricating abuse claims, your attempts to transfer assets, and your plans to manipulate the divorce proceedings. Every email, every text message, every staged incident. I know about all of it." The color drained from her face as she realized the extent of my knowledge. Before she could respond, I added, "I've been building my own documentation, real documentation, for months. Every hotel meeting, every lie about your whereabouts, every conversation about defrauding me and the court. Your deposition should be interesting." She left 30 minutes later without another word, taking only an overnight bag. According to our doorbell camera, Mark picked her up at the end of our driveway, their heated argument clearly visible, though not audible through the car windows. The legal proceedings that followed validated every precaution Catherine had advised. Sarah retained Gregory Patel, an aggressive divorce attorney known for scorched-earth tactics in high-asset cases. Their initial response to our petition was exactly as anticipated, denying the affair despite the mountain of evidence, counter-accusing me of emotional abuse and financial control, and making extraordinary claims about her contributions to my business success. Catherine had prepared for this approach. During discovery, we systematically dismantled each false claim with documented evidence. When Sarah claimed I had isolated her from friends, we produced text messages showing my repeated encouragement of her social activities. When she alleged I had monitored her movements controlling, we countered with evidence of her actual whereabouts during those times. Hotel rooms with Mark rather than the client meetings she'd claimed. The pivotal moment came during Sarah's deposition. Catherine methodically walked her through her relationship with Mark, their plans to manipulate the divorce proceedings, and their conspiracy to fabricate abuse claims. Confronted with printed copies of her own messages and emails, Sarah's carefully constructed narrative collapsed. After attempting to deny the authenticity of the messages, then claiming they were taken out of context, she finally invoked her Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination when questioned about the financial improprieties. This deposition proved devastating to her case. Her attorney requested a recess immediately afterward, and within days, their aggressive posture shifted dramatically towards settlement discussions. Patel, recognizing the weakness of their position, began seeking compromise terms that would avoid the public exposure of a trial. Meanwhile, the parallel proceedings against Mark were equally damaging. His wife's divorce filing included many of the same documents I had gathered, supplemented by additional evidence she had collected independently. Their case was complicated by custody issues regarding their 3 children, with Jennifer seeking sole custody based on Mark's moral character and judgment. The most dramatic development came when Axiom Marketing concluded its ethics investigation. Both Sarah and Mark were terminated for multiple violations of company policy, including misuse of company resources, falsification of expense reports, violation of the relationship policy, and creating a hostile work environment through their behavior. The termination letters, which became part of the court record, detailed specific instances of misconduct that directly contradicted claims in Sarah's divorce response. With her professional credibility shattered and her legal position crumbling, Sarah's attorney finally approached Catherine with a serious settlement proposal. The terms reflected their deteriorated negotiating position. Sarah would withdraw all claims to my business interests, accept a significantly reduced property settlement, and sign an agreement with confidentiality provisions preventing her from making future false claims. Catherine advised me to consider the offer carefully. "You have a very strong case if we go to trial," she acknowledged. "But trials are unpredictable, expensive, and emotionally draining. This settlement gives you nearly everything we would reasonably expect to win at trial, without the additional stress and public exposure." After careful consideration, I agreed to the settlement with one additional condition. Sarah would provide a signed, notarized statement acknowledging her attempt to fabricate abuse claims and manipulate the court process. This document would remain sealed unless she violated the confidentiality provisions in the future, an insurance policy against any attempts to resurrect her false narrative. The final court hearing was anticlimactic compared to the drama that had preceded it. The judge reviewed our settlement agreement, noting that while the asset division deviated significantly from the typical 50-50 division in Texas divorces, the documented circumstances justified the disparity. With a few perfunctory questions and signatures, my 12-year marriage was legally dissolved as we left the courtroom. I saw Sarah in the hallway, standing alone. Mark was notably absent. I later learned he was in Houston for an emergency custody hearing regarding his children. In that moment, Sarah looked nothing like the confident, vibrant woman I had fallen in love with years before. She appeared smaller, somehow diminished by the consequences of her own actions. For a brief moment, our eyes met. I expected to feel triumph or at least vindication, but instead found only a hollow sadness for the life we might have had if she'd made different choices. Without a word, I turned and walked away, closing the final chapter on what had once been the center of my life. The legal proceedings concluded almost 11 months ago now. The divorce was finalized on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, remarkably ordinary for such a life-changing event. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, I felt neither the elation of victory nor the crushing weight of defeat, just a profound sense of closure and the tentative first stirrings of freedom. The material outcomes were largely as Catherine had predicted. The court awarded me our home in the hills, complete ownership of my business holdings, and required Sarah to pay a portion of my legal fees given the documented deception that had necessitated them. She left the proceedings with little more than her personal belongings, a modest cash settlement that barely covered her mounting legal expenses, and a reputation in tatters. The non-disclosure agreement we'd negotiated prevented her from making any public statements about our marriage or divorce, effectively silencing the false narrative she'd attempted to construct in the days immediately following the divorce. I focused on practical matters, changing locks, updating estate documents, reassuring clients and employees that the company remained stable despite my personal turmoil. I converted our master bedroom to a home office, unable to continue sleeping in a space so permeated with memories and betrayal. The guest room became my new sanctuary, minimally furnished and free from associations with my former life. The first month was the hardest. Despite knowing the marriage had been built on deception, 12 years of shared routines left persistent ghosts. I'd catch myself setting 2 coffee mugs on the counter in the morning or turning to share an observation with someone who was no longer there. The sprawling house, once our dream home, felt cavernous and empty. I considered selling it immediately but ultimately decided against making major decisions during the initial shock phase that my company provided essential structure during this period. The software security industry doesn't pause for personal crises, and ongoing client commitments demanded my attention. I threw myself into work with renewed focus, arriving early and staying late. My team noticed the change but respectfully maintained professional boundaries, offering support through small gestures rather than direct conversations about my changed circumstances. By the 3-month mark, I began emerging from the fog of betrayal and litigation. Following my therapist's advice, I established new routines that deliberately differed from those I'd shared with Sarah. I joined a rowing club that practiced on Lady Bird Lake at dawn, finding unexpected solace in the rhythmic physical exertion and the camaraderie of teammates who knew nothing about my past. I renovated sections of the house, erasing the design elements Sarah had chosen and creating spaces that reflected my own aesthetic preferences. Meanwhile, news of Sarah and Mark's situations reached me through informal channels. Sarah had struggled to find comparable employment in Austin, her professional reputation severely damaged by both the ethics violations at Axiom and the whisper network that had spread throughout the tech marketing community. After several months of apparently unsuccessful job hunting, she relocated to Chicago, returning to the city where we'd first met, but now occupying a very different position in life. According to mutual connections who maintained contact with her, she eventually secured an entry-level position at a small marketing firm, a dramatic step down from her previous director-level role. She moved into a modest apartment in a neighborhood far less prestigious than the one we'd lived in during our early relationship. Occasionally, her name would appear in LinkedIn notifications showing desperate attempts to reconnect with former colleagues and clients, most of whom politely maintained their distance. That Mark's fate proved even more severe. His wife Jennifer had leveraged the extensive documentation of his infidelity and deception to secure a highly favorable divorce settlement. He lost their family home and was ordered to pay substantial alimony and child support based on his previous executive-level income. Most devastatingly for him, Jennifer was awarded primary custody of their 3 children, with Mark limited to supervised visitation until he completed court-mandated counseling. His professional fall was equally dramatic. The detailed ethics violations documented by Axiom effectively blacklisted him from comparable positions in marketing management. After months of unemployment, he reportedly took a position as a sales associate at an electronics retailer in a Houston suburb, earning barely enough to cover his court-ordered payments. Former colleagues who encountered him described a broken man, physically aged beyond his years and haunted by the consequences of his choices. Their relationship, predictably, hadn't survived the collapse of their respective lives. According to office gossip relayed by former colleagues, they had turned on each other viciously during the final phase of the Axiom investigation, each attempting to minimize their own culpability by magnifying the others. Their affair had apparently ended amidst bitter recriminations and mutual blame, the passionate connection that had seemed worth destroying 2 marriages proving remarkably fragile when faced with real adversity. Around the 6-month mark after the divorce, my company was approached about a potential acquisition by a larger cybersecurity firm. The timing proved fortuitous. The comprehensive documentation I prepared for the divorce proceedings had required creating detailed valuations and operational assessments that now streamlined the due diligence process. After careful negotiation, I accepted an offer that included both substantial upfront payment and an executive position in the combined entity, overseeing innovation strategy across their expanded product line. This professional victory marked a turning point in my recovery. With my financial future secured beyond what I'd imagined possible before the divorce, I finally felt ready to make more permanent changes to my personal circumstances. I sold the Hill Country house, finding the memories it contained ultimately too burdensome to justify keeping the property. Instead, I purchased a modernist apartment in downtown Austin with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and the lake beyond, a space with no history, ready to be filled with new experiences. As the 1-year anniversary of the divorce approached, I began cautiously re-engaging with social life. A colleague introduced me to his running group, which led to regular Saturday morning trails followed by brunch conversations that gradually extended into other social activities. I joined a book club focused on contemporary fiction, enjoying the intellectual stimulation of perspectives quite different from those in my professional circle. 8 months after the divorce, I attended a fundraiser for a local arts organization and met Elena, a professor of computational linguistics at UT Austin. Our conversation that evening about the intersection of language processing and cybersecurity led to coffee the following week, then dinner the week after. We've been dating for 3 months now, proceeding with the careful deliberation of 2 people who've experienced significant relationships before and understand both the rewards and risks involved. Elena knows the broad outlines of my divorce, but not the detailed anatomy of betrayal that preceded it. When the time is right, I'll share more of that history, but for now, we're focused on building something new rather than dwelling on past wounds. What I appreciate most about our developing relationship is its foundation of genuine mutual respect and transparent communication, qualities I now recognize were absent from my marriage to Sarah despite the elaborate facade we maintained. I've learned that healing isn't linear. Some days still bring unexpected emotional ambushes. A song that played during our honeymoon, catching a glimpse of someone with Sarah's distinctive walk, dreams from which I wake expecting to find her beside me. But these moments have become less frequent and less debilitating with time. Surprisingly, I've found that I don't carry the bitter hatred I once anticipated feeling towards Sarah indefinitely. The most accurate description of my current emotional state regarding her would be profound disappointment mixed with an intellectual curiosity about how someone could compartmentalize their life so completely. The woman I believed I knew intimately for 12 years had revealed herself capable of sustained, calculated deception on a scale I still find difficult to comprehend. As for Mark and Sarah's current circumstances, I neither celebrate their downfall nor wish them further hardship. Their actions had natural consequences. Consequences they both clearly understood were possible when they embarked on their deception. The fact that they believed themselves clever enough to avoid those consequences speaks to an arrogance that itself demanded correction. That if there's something that feels like justice in this story, it's not that they lost their jobs or social standing or comfortable lifestyles. It's that the truth was ultimately revealed and acknowledged. The false narrative they attempted to create, casting me as controlling and abusive while portraying themselves as victims, collapsed under the weight of evidence and reality. In a world where such deceptions often succeed, where gaslighting and manipulation frequently overwhelm facts, this alignment of truth with outcome feels like a restoration of natural order. Looking forward, I've rebuilt my life in ways that feel authentic and sustainable. My company's acquisition has provided both financial security and new professional challenges that engage my full attention. I've developed genuine friendships unconnected to my previous married life. My relationship with Elena offers possibilities for connection based on mutual respect and honest communication that I no longer spend much time thinking about Sarah's betrayal or plotting elaborate responses to it. The energy that once fueled my methodical documentation and strategic planning has been redirected toward creating rather than reacting, building rather than dismantling. The detailed dossiers and careful evidence collection that once occupied my nights now seem like artifacts from another lifetime, necessary tools for a battle that has been decisively concluded. If there's wisdom I've gained from this experience, it's about the importance of seeing reality clearly, even when that reality is painful. For too long, I ignored subtle signs of dishonesty because I was invested in a particular narrative about my marriage. I chose comfortable illusion over uncomfortable truth until the discrepancy became too glaring to deny. The months I spent pretending not to know about Sarah's betrayal while gathering evidence were, in some ways, a continuation of that pattern. A final performance in a relationship built on mutual deception, though of very different kinds. I've come to believe that true strength lies not in controlling outcomes or orchestrating consequences, but in facing reality with open eyes and responding with integrity to whatever it reveals. The calculated response I crafted to Sarah and Mark's betrayal was ultimately effective, but the greatest victory wasn't the legal judgment or their professional downfall. It was my own liberation from a life built on false foundations. Today, as I look out over the Austin skyline from my new home, I feel neither triumphant nor victimized. I am simply present in a life that is authentically mine, built on lessons purchased at considerable cost, but offering wisdom I could have acquired no other way. If Sarah entered my thoughts today, I would acknowledge that despite her intentions, her betrayal ultimately delivered me to a more genuine experience of living than our marriage ever provided. Perhaps that's the most profound revenge of all, not destruction or punishment, but transformation. To emerge from betrayal not diminished but expanded, not embittered but clarified. To build something genuine from the ruins of illusion. To realize that while she and Mark lost positions and possessions and reputations, I gained something far more valuable. The opportunity to live without deception, either from others or myself. As for Sarah and Mark, I've heard through mutual connections that they occasionally cross paths in professional settings, their interactions characterized by tense civility and mutual avoidance. Their affair, once fueled by secrecy and the thrill of deception, withered quickly when exposed to consequences and accountability. Last I heard, Mark was attempting to rebuild a relationship with his children through court-supervised visitation, while Sarah had begun dating a colleague at her new firm, hopefully with greater transparency than she'd shown in our marriage. I wish them clarity, if not happiness, the courage to face themselves honestly and build lives based on truth rather than manipulation. Not for my sake, but for their own and for those who might become involved with them in the future. Revenge may offer momentary satisfaction, but accountability creates the possibility of genuine change. In executing my response to their betrayal, I hope I provided both. For my part, I continue moving forward. My company's new division launches an innovative security protocol next quarter. Elena and I are planning a hiking trip to Big Bend next month. The book club is tackling a challenging novel about forgiveness and redemption that's prompted unexpectedly personal discussions. Life unfolds in ways I couldn't have anticipated during those dark nights of discovery and planning that if there's a lesson in my story for others facing betrayal, perhaps it's this. Calculate your response not from a place of destruction but protection, not with the goal of inflicting pain but establishing truth. The most powerful answer to deception isn't vengeance, but verification. Creating a record so clear and comprehensive that reality cannot be distorted, regardless of who attempts to rewrite it. And then, once truth has been established and protection secured, direct your energy toward building rather than breaking. The most satisfying reply to those who sought to damage your life is to create one more authentic and fulfilling than before. Not despite their betrayal, but in some ways because of it. Because deception, once revealed, offers clarity about what truly matters and what merely appeared to. Today, as spring unfolds across Austin and new possibilities bloom in both my professional and personal life, I find myself unexpectedly grateful for the painful awakening that forced me to rebuild. The calculated response that once consumed my planning has yielded to something more valuable, a calculated life, measured not in victories over others, but in alignment with my own values, built not on appearances, but authenticity, fueled not by others' perceptions, but by personal truth. That, ultimately, is how the story ends, not with the destruction of those who betrayed me, but with my own reconstruction into someone stronger, clearer, and more genuinely alive than the man who once believed in a marriage that existed only as performance. The greatest revenge, it turns out, is living well, not as a platitude, but as a practice of deliberate authenticity that transforms betrayal from an ending into a beginning. If you found this story compelling, please subscribe to our channel for more real-life accounts of betrayal and its consequences. Remember, these stories are shared not to promote vengeance, but to illustrate the human capacity for resilience in the face of profound betrayal. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about getting even, it's about getting better.